Remember the Forgotten.
Chapter 5. A Surprise Guest. Aurora sat on a small wooden chair within the small rooms she called home. It was barely lit, dark and barren enough to feel like a tomb. Even during the day, light barely shone through the windows, and the faded wooden surfaces of the place always seemed dusty no matter how much she cleaned. She, so unlike her parents, had always yearned to leave the city and escape to adventure. Much like her parents, though, she had never been able to work up enough courage to enact change in her life. When they had died, the family home had fallen to her, a large, cosy building which she lived in alone for many years, finding odd jobs where she could to keep warm and fed. Eventually, though, the luck she had, much like her coin, entirely ran out. She had no choice but to sell up and use the gold to rent a far cheaper home, as well as to eat. She was so very tired of it, though. The city life was not for her, and she knew it more and more with each day that passed. All that she needed, more than gold and more than courage, was an excuse to leave. Now she sat at her table, with a long string of parchment laid out before her, scribbling depictions of tall mountains and winding roads, fantastical creatures, and places she could only dream of seeing. All of a sudden, she heard a strange thumping sound coming from the front door. She stopped the drawing and waited a few moments. There it was again. It wasn't a knock, so, not expecting company, she endeavoured to ignore it. But as she stood up and peered down the dim corridor toward the front door out of sheer curiosity, it came again, and she could see that the force was enough to rattle the door on its very hinges. Her instinct was to back away, to run and hide, or escape out of a window. But with the thought-consuming yearn for adventure still lingering in her head, the wonder and mystery of the drawing still clouding her mind's eye, she couldn't help but feel as if something out there was waiting for her. Slowly and hesitantly, she stepped across the creaky floorboards of the dark hallway toward the door, until she stood right beside it. She carefully reached out for the handle, pulling back suddenly out of shock as another thump rocked the frame. Taking a deep breath through her nose, she twisted the handle and pulled the door finally open. Before she knew what was happening, a dark figure had lurched through the doorway and stumbled into her home forcefully, as if he'd been trying to batter down the door. The person nearly fell to the floor in confusion, but just managed to catch himself on the wall, while Aurora watched on in shock. The man was hunched over, but as he raised his gaze to meet hers, Aurora could see his features clearly. Even huddled in his dark cloak, it was plain that he was badly injured. Tears and bloodstains littered his clothing, and his pale face, framed by long strands of matted black hair, was covered with bruises. After the quiet moment of unexpected calm, the man suddenly lurched again, slamming into the door with his shoulder and shutting it from the inside. After a few moments, he put his back to it and slid down to a heap on the floor, breathing out a long, ragged breath. Aurora backed away slowly, feeling more confused than she did scared. "Who the hell are you?" she asked, surprising herself with her calmness. I, stuttered the man, his dark eyes darting around the room in obvious panic. "Someone's trying to kill me." Aurora's eyes opened wide, her curiosity suddenly off the charts. "Why?" she asked. "Who are you?" I'm Zircon," replied the man, his rattled nerves seeming to calm slightly, if only for a second. "I'm Aurora," Aurora told him in return. "Do you need help? Shall I fetch the guard?" Zircon shakily raised to his feet, peering through the foggy, stained window beside the door. Aurora peered through behind him and could see a large group of city watchmen beginning to splinter off into groups just down the street. Zircon quickly lowered himself back down, and he looked to Aurora with poorly veiled panic. "No, you can't go to the watch," he whimpered loudly. I'm I'm a noble from Hillmaven. I came here on business, but my guard betrayed me. The whole city watch could be in on it. Yes, I mustn't let the guards see me." He looked around anxiously, eyeing the walls but seeming to almost look through them. I need to get out of the city as soon as possible." Aurora's eyes widened as the cogs began to turn in her head. This was just the opportunity she was waiting for. A chance to escape the city and make a life for herself elsewhere. With the support of a nobleman also, how could it possibly go wrong? Suddenly, another series of loud bangs rattled the doorframe. "This is the city watch!" called a loud voice from the other side. "Open up!" Zircon's eyes widened at the sound of the man's voice, and he visibly swallowed. Outside, Greg hammered on the door with his huge fist. Leaning into the window to peer through, he saw only his large reflection in the foggy gloom. "Open up immediately!" he insisted, but still there was no answer. He put his ear to the door, eyes narrowed in suspicion. A soft shuffling sound came from within. "Last chance!" he shouted a final time. "I know somebody's in there!" The door creaked and rattled, opening just a few inches to reveal the face of a woman staring back at him. "Can I help you?" asked Aurora, her eyes wide. Greg looked at her gruffly, eyes narrowed still as he spoke. "On behalf of the City Watch, I demand to search your premises." "I'm afraid there's nothing to find, sir," Aurora stated quickly, beginning to push the door closed. Greg leaned in and pushed against it. "I'll be the judge of that," he growled, shoving the door inwards and forcing himself inside. Aurora stepped back and let the man enter, watching closely as he surveyed the room suspiciously. The decor was very sparse, even by Greg's standards, and there was certainly nobody else there, but he knew she was hiding something. He stepped into the next room slowly, the floorboards creaking under his heavy boot, and peered at another door sitting in the corner. "What's through there?" he demanded, looking back to Aurora commandingly. "Oh, there?" Aurora answered, swiftly making her way over and stepping in front of the door to block him. "That's just the cellar. Anyway, how's the guard doing nowadays? I had an uncle once who—" "Out of the way, ma'am," demanded Greg, reaching around for the door handle. "No," Aurora shouted. "I promise you, he's not hiding in there." Greg froze, and his brow furrowed. "Wait," he deducted. "You said he's not hiding in there, but that suggests that he is hiding somewhere. That means you're a liar. And if you're lying about that, that means you're probably lying about him not being in the cellar." Aurora stood stunned for a second, then sighed and looked down to the floor remorsefully. "You're right," she admitted. "He's in the cellar." Greg shouted triumphantly and swung open the door. As he looked down the dark staircase, he grinned to himself. "It's a wonder I never made detective." When Greg took his first step down the dark staircase, Aurora lunged forward and pushed him with all her might. The man fell forward with a wail and immediately tumbled into the darkness and out of sight. The sounds of his painful descent and the clanking of armour still pouring from the dark passage. Aurora closed the door, twisted the handle, and locked it with a click. "We need to leave," she whispered loudly as she let go of the handle and hurried over to the wardrobe on the far side of the room. Its doors creaked as they slowly opened, revealing the form of Zircon, huddled in the darkness under a pile of coats. He took an uncertain step out and quickly shed the clothes hanging from his body. "But they're still looking for me." "But they're not looking for a frail old woman," Aurora reasoned, throwing an old grey blanket over Zircon's head. "Let's go, quickly." Aurora and Zircon stalked through the dark, eerily quiet back alleys surrounding her home, continuing through past the piles of rubbish and rats scurrying across the cobbles. They walked and walked under the dim light of the clouded moon, listening for the sounds of frantic guardsmen and adjusting their route to avoid them. The two snuck through the streets quietly and inconspicuously, continuing for long until they finally spotted the western gate of the huge stone wall that enclosed the city. A guard stood either side of the relatively small gate, each with a spear in one hand and a torch in the other, illuminating the reflective metal of their chainmail armour with a soft flickering glow. As the pair of runaways peeked out from behind the edge of one of the many dark alleys, Aurora turned to Zircon worriedly. "How do we get past them?" she asked him. "They'll surely be on alert." Zircon returned her glance with a finally confident expression. "Don't worry," he told her with a grin. "I can get us past those guards." "So, how long are you on for tonight?" one of the guards said to the other, bored eyes wandering the bleak landscape of the city under the flickering light of his torch. "I'm on for a couple more hours," the other responded. "I'm probably going to get an early night." I'm not on for long myself," said the first guard. "I'll probably grab some drinks at the tavern after." The other grinned and nodded to himself, indulging the fantasy. "Yeah, that sounds pretty good." "Then again," continued the first guard, "I have an early shift tomorrow. Maybe an early night would be best." The guards looked towards each other as they chatted, paying no mind to the two figures who had begun to approach from the street. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Zircon began. "I am a nobleman from Hillmaven, and I travelled to your fine town 3 nights ago in order to purchase a small—" "Yeah, one sec, mate," one of the guards interrupted, not turning away from his conversation. He reached out and grabbed one of the gate handles as his friend did the same, beginning to pull the gateway open. "Anyway," he continued, "how's the wife doing?" Not too bad," the other replied. "Gold's a bit tight at the moment, though." I know what you mean. I've got another little one on the way, and I don't know how I'm going to afford it." Zircon and Aurora gave each other a confused look, but wasted no time in zipping through the partially open gate before anyone could move to stop them.